According to Republicans, three little words are ruining America.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what they mean by that is shut up.
DEI, in this case, stands for divisive, erroneous, and insidious.
DEI, which stands for didn't earn it.
Discrimination, exclusion, and indoctrination.
But DEI forces you to discriminate.
Republicans do not like DEI. Not in schools, not at work, not from a podcast, not from a book. Florida has banned it. Alabama went a step further, banning anything divisive that could blame white people for anything we've ever done. Project 2025 is calling for all federal rules, regulations, contracts, and pieces of legislation to be scrubbed of a long list of troublesome words, including inclusion, diversity, equity, and even gender. This all has me wondering, what is it about DEI that has them all up in arms and feeling victimized? How did Republicans take what was largely just corporate lip service to appear inclusive and turn it into a woke left crusade on their lives? Turns out, as with most issues on the far right, it's mostly made up. But the threat that doing away with DEI poses is very, very real. This is why they're coming for DEI. Roll the intro.
This poisonous alphabet soup, DEI, CRT, BDS, that's being crammed down these young skulls.
A growing number of American companies facing a racial reckoning in the aftermath of George Floyd's killing.
Is being exposed for the false god that it actually is.
Thank you to my partner on today's video, Warby Parker. I've been working as a partner with Warby Parker for years at this point, but I have been wearing Warby Parker glasses for way longer. These things got me through law school, y'all. When I think of Warby Parker, I think quality, convenience, and also fashion. Where else can you find all three? I mean, really. Warby Parker is committed to providing exceptional vision care online and in stores, offering eyeglasses, sunglasses, eye exams, and contact lenses. Glasses start at $95, including prescription lenses, and you can try Warby Parker's free at-home try-on program. You order 5 pairs of glasses to try on at home for free for 5 days. There's no obligation to buy. The try-on glasses ship free and include a prepaid return shipping label. You can try 5 pairs of glasses at home for free by going to warbyparker.com/Leeja. So I'm always looking to freshen up my eyewear, so I got this at-home try-on kit, and I'm looking for something cute, okay? These are the Durand Wide in Rosewater. Ooh. These are the 𝗬𝗓. Kind of like that. They're big. And then we have the Drew in Wide. I need the wide frames because I got a big old head. And we got another kind of nerdy pair. Is it too much? And then the Haskell Wide in Crystal. Seriously, I need new glasses, so tell me what you like in the comments below. Now you can save 15% when you buy 2 or more pairs of glasses or sunglasses today. And if you prefer shopping IRL, Warby Parker has 190 retail locations throughout the US. Go to warbyparker.com/Leeja to order your home try-on kit for free today. Thanks, Warby Parker. What we know today as DEI has its roots in the 1960s and another wildly controversial effort to level the playing field for historically marginalized people, affirmative action. It first appeared in Executive Order 10925, signed by President John F. Kennedy in 1961. The order included a provision that government contractors should take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed and employees are treated fairly during employment without regard to their race, creed, color, or national origin. No definition of affirmative action was provided. Willard Wirtz, who was Secretary of Labor at the time, indicates nobody expected the phrase to take off. He later said that when they wrote it, affirmative action mostly just meant taking the initiative to help the underprivileged instead of just not discriminating. The order created the President's Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity, also called PCEEO, or simply the Committee, which initiated policies, processed individual complaints of employer discrimination, and collected racial data on employment by the government. It also worked directly with employers to identify the causes of discriminatory patterns and address them. But even though Executive Order 10925 was, according to President Kennedy, both an announcement of our determination to end job discrimination once and for all and an effective instrument to realize that objective, the committee's staff and budget were tiny compared with its enormous, super high-profile mission. 40 full-time workers, $500,000 in annual budget. The end. Still, it was a step in what seemed like the right direction, and the committee did help bring about some measurable wins. Historically, black people held only about 1% of all white-collar jobs in the defense industry. But thanks to affirmative action, by 1963, black people were being hired in proportion to the population. Then came the Civil Rights Act of 1964, making it illegal to discriminate based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin in public accommodations and facilities, employment, and education. The Civil Rights Act also created the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, to replace the committee in enforcing anti-discrimination in American workplaces. The Civil Rights Act was followed by a whole host of new rules that disrupted the highly segregated status quo of American life. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 prohibited discrimination in housing. In 1969, the Supreme Court ruled in Alexander v. Holmes County Board of Education that all schools must be desegregated at once. Then in 1978, the Supreme Court approved affirmative action programs as a means to achieve diversity in higher education. Racists could seriously not catch a break. As employees began filing discrimination lawsuits with the EEOC in the 60s and 70s, companies began incorporating diversity training into their business strategies to avoid those pesky lawsuits. It wasn't until the 80s and 90s that diversity officers and diversity programs started popping up and the field began professionalizing. But not everyone was happy to see a whole industry cropping up around this diversity business. Early on, President Ronald fucking Reagan, ever heard of him, had his mind set on changing an LBJ-era executive order that included specific affirmative action quotas for federal contractors. But when his intentions leaked to the media, massive backlash ensued. Civil rights groups, corporate leaders, and in an unexpected twist, politicians on both sides of the aisle were apparently fans of affirmative action and didn't want it to go away. In 1985, a survey of Fortune 500 companies showed that 95% of companies intended to keep their programs whether the executive order was changed or not. Members of Reagan's own cabinet, as well as 126 members of Congress, also wrote a letter calling affirmative action a necessary and proper response to the tragic legacy of historical discrimination which continues to plague our country. So, Reagan didn't end up getting to issue a new executive order like he wanted, but during his 2 terms, he did manage to slow things down. His support for corporate deregulation led to some diversity efforts losing steam. He also ordered dozens of municipalities to slim down their affirmative action plans and caused a backlog at the EEOC to the tune of thousands of pending discrimination complaints. Fun fact, the chair of the EEOC at that time was Clarence Thomas, who remains a vocal critic of affirmative action to this day. It was during the Reagan years that corporate equal opportunity initiatives started evolving to more closely resemble DEI of today. While earlier models had relied more on the fairness case for diversity, which focuses on moral and social justice logic before pursuing diversity, savvy DEI professionals understood that to get a seat in the C-suite, they'd need to make a business case for diversity. And it worked. Corporations ate up claims that a more diverse workforce leads to increased innovation, improved decision-making, increased employee and customer satisfaction, reduced turnover, and best of all, increased productivity. Basically, hey, there's a whole sector of the population we are not successfully and equally exploiting for capitalism yet. By 2003, the diversity business was estimated to be worth $8 billion a year. But in recent years, scholars have discovered that there are some major downsides to the business case for diversity. It often leads executives to form unrealistic expectations about diversity's effect on the bottom line, and as a result, can actually end up weakening their support for diversity programs. And the focus on business and bottom lines, as opposed to, genuinely caring about fairness and inclusion, means that corporate DEI initiatives also fall short. Their focus is inherently on getting back to business. Avoid pricey lawsuits and reputational faux pas to stay in business, keep the shareholders happy, and live to fight another day. Those goals are diametrically opposed to the reality of facilitating meaningful DEI initiatives. That work is hard and messy, and honestly requires people to grant one another a lot more grace than I think a lot of people are prepared to give in public or at work when they're just trying to get through the day and go home. That being said, a Pew survey from 2023 found that a majority of US workers said that focusing on DEI at work was a good thing. About 6 in 10 workers said their company had policies regarding fairness in hiring, pay, or promotions, and 52% said they'd done trainings or meetings on DEI at work. About half of workers who've participated in DEI trainings in the last year said they were helpful. But what even is DEI? Not the conservative distortion of it, but like the actual definitions. The Office of Labor Management Standards, OLMS, a federal agency that actively promotes diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in the workplace, defines diversity as the existence of variety in an environment, with categories including physical attributes, appearance, abilities, educational background, family background, age, gender, marital status, ethnicity, religion, nationality, and class. Equity, which is different from equality, distributes resources according to individual needs so that everyone ends up on a comparable level. I suspect Americans have a particularly hard time with this one because it flies in the face of the myth that America is a meritocracy and that everyone has the same amount of opportunity and potential here. So some people instead try to focus on equality. Everyone gets equal access to everything, ignoring the very real historical inequalities that have lasting impacts on society and marginalized groups. Equity relies on a multicultural or color-conscious perspective. Its goal is to take into consideration the diverse ways that diverse people show up in their diversity. The logic of equality is the same thinking that brought us colorblindness, the notion that simply claiming not to see color and promising to treat everyone the same is the best way to end racial disparities. But that perspective primarily serves the people in power who don't want to feel icky about themselves. I don't see color, so please don't bring it up ever or make me talk about it at all. Colorblindness, though positioned as the ultimate endpoint of the Great American Experiment, ends up recreating the same microaggressive, internalized, and systematically racist patterns, because it means we're just not talking about the issues at all, which benefits the oppressors and quiets the marginalized, which is kind of the whole reason we need DEI. So E is for equity, not equality. And then the final piece, inclusion, is about ensuring that not only are diverse employees getting hired, but they also feel a sense of belonging in the workplace. For better productivity, each employee should feel valued and appreciated at work by their employer and peers. It's all about ensuring that all employees know they are welcome to the company and add value. What does that look like? Who knows? Certainly not most companies, but one group of people who definitely know that they have not been feeling welcome lately: white conservatives, the most marginalized of us all. According to a recent Pew study, 78% of Democratic-leaning workers said focusing on DEI at work is a good thing, versus 30% of Republicans and right-leaning workers. Did you know on Patreon you can get early access to these videos ad-free and uncensored? Thank you to my Patreon community and my YouTube members for supporting the research and work that goes into these videos. Consider checking out my Patreon community or clicking the big join button below to become a member here on YouTube. You'll be supporting my work and getting access to early, ad-free, uncensored versions of all these videos, as well as access to all my research and all my sources, exclusive live streams, and more. Your support helps to keep these videos free for everyone and further our mission towards legal and political education for all. So it turns out that Republicans and I actually have something in common after all. We don't like being told what to do. And while for me it's because I'm a Capricorn, for them it's because they want to be racists. But it turns out that a lot of humans don't like being told what to do. Social scientists have proven that people often rebel against rules just to assert their autonomy. One Harvard Business Review study from 2016 found that the 3 most popular DEI interventions, mandatory diversity training, job tests, and grievance systems, make firms less diverse, not more, because managers resist feeling strong-armed. Force-feeding can backfire and end up activating bias rather than stamping it out. So just right out the gate, conservatives hate DEI because of the don't fucking tell me what to do factor. In his 2022 paper, Understanding Advantaged Groups' Opposition to DEI Policies, very on point, 𝗫𝗫𝗫𝗫 identifies 3 types of threats that can help explain advantaged groups' opposition to DEI policies. 1, resource threat, a concern about losing access to outcomes and opportunities. If we let more Black people in, they'll take my job. 2, symbolic threat, concern about the introduction of new values, culture, and expectations. I don't know any Black people and I don't understand their culture, therefore I fear it. And 3, in-group morality threat, concern about being called out for their group's role in perpetuating inequality. The conservative uproar that we've been seeing lately is the result of all of those fears crashing together, then being animated by upsetting anecdotes on Fox News about reverse discrimination and the victimization and alienation of straight white men, mainly. They've never in history had to consider their role in society or experience having their success questioned, so this is all new and really hard for them. Critics of DEI consider the initiatives expensive, performative, and even a source of division. And on this point, they might not be entirely wrong. Hear me out. A 2022 paper from the Yale School of Management found that despite its seeming positivity, the most prevalent organizational diversity case functions as a cue of social identity threat that paradoxically undermines belonging across LGBTQ+ individuals, STEM women, and African Americans, thus hindering organizations' diversity goals. Translation: calling attention to diversity as a hiring priority puts a target on the backs of the most marginalized people in the workplace. And this is actually one of the objections that crosses over to the other main area of DEI drama: education. This tension between celebrating individualism and acknowledging larger social patterns is at the heart of a great deal of the conservative pushback to DEI anywhere, but especially in schools. I suspect that K-12 schools and colleges alike have become flashpoints for this argument because of something we discussed in my student protest video from a couple weeks ago. Schools represent a unique intersection point of state funding and moral panic. They can scream, "Think of the children," while also exerting control through state and federal funding or the withholding of said funding. For the people less interested in problematizing the principle of DEI, attacking its costs is a popular alternative. In his viral 2021 opinion piece for the Wall Street Journal, theoretical physicist 𝗬𝗏𝗏 warned that DEI had become a tyrannical force in higher education. Once entrenched, he wrote, the DEI offices began to grow unchecked. They became huge and expensive offices, not subject to faculty oversight. This same year, 2021, word had gotten around that UC Berkeley was spending around $25 million a year on its DEI efforts. Conservatives were scandalized to learn that 58% of those funds came from taxpayers and tuition, while another 31% came from federal and state grants. And that sounds like a lot until you hear that the DEI department's allocation represents less than 1% of the school's total budget, proportionally tiny. Yet the impact of DEI on campus culture has been enormous. Honestly, it's hard to tell how much of the culture shift is being driven by DEI versus how much DEI is simply reflecting a natural evolution of thought. And while much of the change is driven by a genuine desire to increase diversity on college campuses and make those campuses inclusive and comfortable for a wide variety of students, the reality is complicated. In fact, many professors say the new paradigm is making their jobs impossible. In his Wall Street Journal op-ed, 𝗬𝗏𝗏𝗏 argued that DEI stifles free expression by creating a climate of pervasive fear on campus. And while some of the free expression that is stifled on campuses by DEI includes blatant racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, and more, and often the DEI policies are seen as oppressive simply because they require professors and students to take a beat and think about their biases and blind spots, there is a discussion to be had around liberal schools, the silencing of free speech, and the merits of having an entire student body that largely conforms to one specific ideology. How educational can an environment like that be? Writing in Newsweek, two professors argued that universities' obsession with DEI poses a threat to the academy's primary mission, the production and dissemination of knowledge, by enforcing adherence to one worldview and chilling speech. And I gotta say, I know some professors personally, progressive ones, who confirm that it has become disturbingly difficult to have anything resembling a real conversation in college classrooms these days. The looming fear felt by both professors and students of being called out or canceled for accidentally misspeaking or saying the wrong thing makes it impossible to establish the trust needed to facilitate deep learning experiences that challenge and expand our understanding of the world. And this is a chilling effect I've personally been on both sides of. As a woman on the internet, I definitely know what it's like to hesitate before saying something that you know is going to get oversimplified and roasted by people determined to interpret your words a particular way. My comment section is a cesspool of trolls and misogynists. But on the other hand, as an undergrad at Vassar, a quintessentially liberal college,
I know it's super not Vassar or PC to say this, but I think Hillary is even more important than Obama.
And a law student at Northeastern University, which proudly hung signs declaring us the queerest law school in America, there was definitely a strong incentive to perform your leftism. When the one finance bro in class would speak up and reveal his own conservatism, we would revel in ripping him to shreds. But we also policed one another, convinced that our essential goodness was on the line with every word, action, and even thought. We demanded liberal perfection of ourselves and each other. And because it's exhausting and stressful to exist around people you have to perform for all the time, there was a lot of self-segregation at Vassar in particular. You could walk into the cafeteria and see tables full of black students separated from tables full of white students. After graduating from Vassar, I didn't know what the fuck to do with my life, so I took some classes at a local music school, the kind filled with 18 18-year-olds who mostly didn't do great in a traditional school setting. They didn't get A's, but they were incredibly talented and creative and seeking a creative career in music. The friends I made at that school were way more diverse than my friends at Vassar. And frankly, the conversations I had at this basically community college, the type of college that is looked down upon by the liberal elites that I was surrounded by at Vassar, were far more educational from a DEI perspective and facilitated greater discussion and cultural exchange than anything I experienced at Vassar or later in law school, largely because we weren't bound up in this rhetoric of liberal perfectionism that makes it so any misstep and you are labeled a bad person for life. It's a lot easier to have open conversations when you don't have to worry that if you say one wrong thing, instead of having your words called out and corrected, you are labeled a racist for life and thrown into the dumpster labeled problematic. And I'm not saying people, myself included, shouldn't be held accountable for problematic words or actions. Those absolutely should be acknowledged and condemned. But it's the black and white labeling of people as inherently problematic, as opposed to labeling their actions problematic, that leftists tend to espouse that leads to a chilling of the types of discussions that would actually move the needle in the direction of the type of world we say we want to live in. And part of the Republican backlash comes from this fear that if they say one wrong thing, they'll be canceled, that they're not allowed to make mistakes. And so their natural, if ill-advised and emotionally mature reaction is, well, fuck those guys, we can't say anything anymore, so why even try? But while there are valid criticisms to be made of DEI, both in corporations and at universities, and whether or not it's actually effective in fostering actual diversity, actual equity, or actual inclusion, unfortunately, that's not what this is really about. Republican leaders don't want to get rid of DEI because it gets in the way of the free exchange of ideas. They don't want a free exchange of ideas at all. They want their ideas and their identity to stop being challenged and criticized. They want to go back to the assimilation model where nothing about them has to change. Conservatism hinges on the belief that at some prior point in history, life was better than it is now. For American conservatives, no period was sweeter than the 1950s, before all this affirmative action malarkey got started. So the natural solution to them, then, is to get rid of it. Focusing on DEI in education is helping conservatives whip up moral outrage that can be spread out to oppose DEI more broadly. We're seeing an attempt to shift the Overton window play out in real time. Reminder that the Overton window represents the range of politically acceptable ideas at any given time. One shifts the Overton window by yelling loudly about things that are farther right or farther left than are currently politically acceptable. You're seen as crazy until you're not. For example, 2 years ago, the discussion about abortion centered around how long a person has to wait to get the abortion and whether parental approval is required if the person is under 18. Today, the discussion around abortion is whether and how many organs a pregnant person can lose before their life matters. This was unthinkable 2 years ago. Today, it's so commonplace it made it before the Supreme Court. Because through legal and grassroots activism on the right, the Overton window has shifted to make these discussions politically normalized. The same has happened with DEI. 2 years ago, we were discussing whether DEI in schools was effective. Today, DEI is banned in Florida and elsewhere, with numerous federal lawmakers trying to take the ban national. By stoking resentment about DEI in education, conservatives are making DEI less attractive everywhere. Only once DEI loses enough support does it become possible to push through policies gutting it for good. On June 29, 2023, the Supreme Court rejected the use of race-conscious admissions in higher education by striking down affirmative action programs at both Harvard and the University of North Carolina that were being used to boost the number of underrepresented minority students. In her dissenting opinion, Justice Jackson wrote that the banning of affirmative action in college admissions pulls the ripcord and announces colorblindness for all by legal fiat, but deeming race irrelevant in law does not make it so in life. It would be amazing if we could wave a magic wand and say, beep, beep, boop, racism is over, everyone has access to equal opportunities, here's a fresh slate to start from. But it doesn't work like that. Simply pretending that horrible shit didn't happen or that you don't benefit from any of that horrible shit doesn't make it go away. When Obama became president, a lot of white liberals patted themselves on the back and declared racism a thing of the past. But the ferocious opposition Obama faced during his tenure, followed by the brutal backlash of the Trump years, coupled with endless examples of unconscionable police brutality against Black Americans, has forced the realization that colorblindness was not the solution it was cracked up to be. And that made conservatives very uncomfortable. Conservatives often complain that they're being told to shut up. Really, they're being asked to listen. But instead, they'd rather make sure that nobody can say anything that they don't want to hear. According to the Chronicle of Higher Education, since 2023, at least 82 bills opposing DEI in higher education have been filed in more than 20 states. 12 of them have passed. Florida was among the first states to pass a law restricting DEI initiatives. Today, public universities there not only can't spend money on DEI, but it weakened tenure protections and slapped new restrictions on how college-level educators can discuss discrimination in mandatory courses. Texas, North Carolina, North Dakota, Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, and Alabama have all passed similar bills. But the Alabama law takes things up yet another notch, limiting the teaching of divisive concepts, meaning concepts that assign fault, blame, or bias to any race, religion, gender, or nationality. Funny how bias could apply to anyone, but that's not the focus. The inclusion of both fault and blame on that list signals who these policies are really meant to benefit: white people. White people who cannot handle being made to even acknowledge that other white people have ever done anything bad, or that we're still existing in a society that was built on white people doing bad things. Because yeah, it's uncomfortable to confront history, reality, and the ways in which you might benefit from how society is set up. So instead of doing the hard work, conservatives want to make it go away. Just like racists in the Jim Crow South blamed black students for their lunch counter sit-ins, ruining the peaceful order and beautiful coexistence that Jim Crow laws had created because it forced them to contend with the barbarity of those laws. And racists today are being forced to contend with the fact that race-based discrimination is in fact very alive and well, and that the society that makes them feel so comfortable is actually incredibly uncomfortable, sometimes downright deadly, for others. But they're not going to let the civil rights movement happen again, not on their watch. Instead, they're going to ban it before it can even get started, so they can continue living in their happy 1950s wet dream. Since these anti-DEI laws have started taking effect, schools have laid off diversity employees across the country. The Multicultural Engagement Center at the University of Texas at Austin fired 60 administrators in one fell swoop before closing down altogether. These job losses are part of a larger workforce-wide trend towards downsizing or eliminating DEI altogether. Since July 2023, DEI job postings have declined by 38%. Anticipating a potential second term for Trump, some organizations are renaming their diversity departments and basically doing a search and replace for any terms Project 2025 wants to ban. The University of Tennessee renamed its campus DEI program the Division of Access and Engagement. Apparently, engagement is the new term we should have an eye out for, because Louisiana State University also rebranded its diversity office from the Division of Inclusion, Civil Rights, and Title IX to the Division of Engagement, Civil Rights, and Title IX. At the federal level, House Democrats are doing what they can to push back against the anti-DEI backlash and enshrine more protections for DEI. On his first day in office, President Biden signed an executive order requiring federal agencies to evaluate how they might advance racial equity and support for underserved communities. In April this year, Democrats introduced two new pieces of legislation aiming to codify DEI practices into federal programming opportunities. Of course, if Trump wins in November, none of it will matter. But that's true for almost everything. So please vote, y'all. Because even though Republicans like to make it sound like gutting DEI is just about leveling the proverbial playing field, it's not. Think about what being anti-DEI really means. Against diversity, because you believe in colorblindness. Against equity, because you believe in meritocracy, that everyone is born with the same access to resources and it's just a matter of how hard you work. And against inclusion, because you can't be bothered to make environments comfortable for other people. So what can we do instead? Research from the Harvard Business Review suggests that a change in approach could go a long way. Though corporate executives tend to favor a rigid command and control approach to diversity because it provides a simple list of things to do and not to do that are easy to police, people are way more motivated by less coercive tactics. The analysis found that companies get much better results when they stop trying to shove rules down people's throats and instead engage them in a more one-on-one human way. Because the reality is that until we stamp out inequality, something that will likely not happen in our lifetimes, we'll need some form of DEI. What we call it and how we practice it will naturally evolve over time with our needs. It's not perfect, but it's absolutely necessary. Shout out to my newest supporters, as well as supporters in my royal tiers, and a very special shout out to my multi-platinum supporters, T, Latranger Lucas, Joshua Cole, Thomas Johnson, Sophia Sams, Anthony Giles, Tay, and Brett Piontek. Your generosity makes this channel what it is, so thank you. If you enjoyed this video, you'll also like the one I made about how conservatives sabotage public schools. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.